What's up, Barefoot Nation? This week, we are going to be talking all about Stromanthe. In other words, you've got Trio Star, you've got Charlie, and you've got a couple others. Let's go! So the Stromanthe that most of us are probably familiar with is called Trio Star, and that's this guy right here. They have beautiful blocks of sometimes white to pinkish variegation. So you can kind of see right there some of the cream variegation. It's going to be kind of hard to capture the kind of pinkish part of the cream variegation because it's usually coming from the sun kind of shining through the leaves. And that's going to give you that coloration that we all know and love. The first rule with these Stromanthes is going to be sunlight. And so now, the amount of sun that these plants are going to need really is going to vary on what you have. The Stromanthe here is going to be happy with, a couple hours of direct sun in the morning down to, some good bright indirect light. This Stromanthe is in a north-facing window. It's actually facing northwest, so it's going to catch some of that evening sun. So it actually does get good bright light. You can see the leaves that are standing up. This is kind of its nighttime form. And so basically what will happen, particularly in the summertime, if you bring your plants outside, I highly recommend you put your plants outside in shade for the summer. They will completely, every single leaf will be kind of turned up. If you notice that right where the leaf meets the stem, that little wrist actually will articulate and go up and down, which is one of the reasons why they're in the prayer plant group. So basically, what you're going to want to avoid with Stromanthe is they do not want full sun, in my experience. I'm sure that there might be kind of a sun angle that might work where they can be in full sun. But as houseplants and here in the northeastern United States, they don't want sun for more than probably 5 hours at absolute maximum. Otherwise, basically what's going to happen is the leaves are going to scorch. Now let's talk about pot size. So it really can't be understated. The size of the Stromanthe pot should not be small. I have found that these plants, partially because of the amount of moisture that they love to be in a nice big container. They love to be in a nice big container. Partially what that's going to do is it's going to moderate water because there's more soil. This plant right here was planted out from I think it was just like a standard small size that you see up north nowadays. It wasn't like it started in a 3-gallon. So it's definitely grown quite a lot in the past probably 18 months or so. So I have the best luck with these guys planting them in a pot that seems way too big, and also this pot has no drainage. I know. It seems crazy, but these plants actually do very well in a semi-aquatic to even an aquatic environment. You could absolutely, if you have a water feature, plant these in like a pondless waterfall or somewhere for the summer if you live in a cold climate like I do. And if you're in the tropics, then these would do very well in a water feature. So, obviously you can really see the spider webs in addition to the pink undersides of the leaves, and that's just one of those reasons why a lot of people fall in love with this plant. It's also worth noting, too, is that in the fall when I brought this plant in, it was literally in standing water. I have not watered this plant since autumn. Again, the pot has no drainage holes. So, it's got extremely high humidity as a result of its little pond situation. But the dry air from indoors, it's, as you can see also, it's next to a vent. And so the vent is blowing, hot, dry air onto the plant. It's kind of got an interesting convex sort of situation going on here. But let's see some other different types of Stromanthe. So this is a bad angle. So this is actually one of my favorite different Stromanthes. This is actually called Magic Star, and I love this plant because this has some kind of Thai constellation Monstera vibes going, if you know what I mean. But this costs a heck of a lot less than a Thai constellation. So, but that's not the only reason I love it. So I also love more subtle variegations, but this plant here, if you watched my houseplant tour, you'll have seen it in a 6-inch container, and now if you look at this pot, you can see it's gotten a huge upgrade. And I think that a lot of people would think that's too much, but I have found that giving it this large root volume is going to really allow it to take off. And again, just a nice minimalist, yet kind of textured. This pot does have drainage, just because I liked the container, but you can't tell right now, but this plant actually is in a south-facing window, right up against the window. Yup, you heard that right. Everyone thinks that these plants can't handle a lot of sun, but and direct sun, no. Outside, there's a screen and then the double glazing, so it's in a window, but it's not getting direct light, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I find that these plants can handle a lot more light than we give them credit. And the reason these leaves look bad, in my opinion, is because they're older. And so older leaves are eventually going to die off. Again, what I'm kind of trying to encourage is it'd be really neat if the plant did the full folding indoors. So here what you're looking at is a Stromanthe called Charlie. And this is not Stromanthe sanguinea. This is actually Stromanthe stromanthoides, or something to that effect. And this plant, you can see, has some leaf burn. If you trace this back, this burnt, crappy looking leaf, it's just an old leaf. This is getting some direct southern sun in the morning, as is the Magic Star, for maybe like an hour or two. So that's probably why it's doing as well as it is. But this was outside in the shade, again facing south during the summer on the patio. But when you give a plant more light, you're going to need to water it more because you're pushing that photosynthesis more than you would be if it was in shade. Is this leaf bugging anyone now that you noticed it? Let's fix this. But again, if you notice, this plant, I bought this plant in a 6-inch container, and it's planted in a container that's at least 12 inches in diameter, possibly more. And it's definitely a little bit taller than a foot. I also love the false imprints of alocasias on the leaves, but I'm distracted. So, talking about fertilizer, what you're going to want to know is I don't fertilize anything inside. So this plant, when it's indoors from the autumn up until early summer, this gets no fertilizer. What I do have in its soil mixture, which as you can tell based on especially the begonias, is a good amount of composted manure. Manure is not going to have a stench to it if it's composted properly. And I also potted this up in the summertime, so any mild odor that it might have had will have kind of gone away by the time it comes in for fall. But yeah, so I mean, it's pretty easy. I'm going to do a separate video on chemical fertilizer versus organic and basically how it correlates to pests. I guess just the synopsis of that video will be, if you want less pest problems, don't use chemical fertilizer. It's not a bulletproof way to get rid of pests. I guess that kind of dovetails nicely into the pest section. But I want to show you a different plant. So talking about pests, I'll talk about this plant a little bit later. Stromanthe is a pretty dang pest-resistant plant in general. I haven't really seen any problems with it. Now, it looks like it has spider mites, right? But that's actually dirt or soil or media or whatever on the leaves because I recently repotted it in the basement, so it actually might be basement ceiling, whatever. You know how those ceiling tiles in the basement are kind of messy. Alright guys, and so this plant right here is my Stromanthe sanguinea SP. So in other words, this is the species form of where Trio Star, Magic Star, Horticolor,
A few moments later.
I'm forgetting the rest, but there's a whole bunch. But this is where it all came from. So this is the plant that's actually native to Brazil, I believe, South America. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. They have a lovely shine to them, and they still have, or it's not pronounced much, but they do have a white central vein. And I'm sure that's kind of where the genetic mutation happened with this plant, is there was some plant in the jungle that had a little streak or like a tiny remnant of variegation, or not a remnant of variegation, but a tiny mutation that over time was bred, and then boom, that's how you get these plants. Not that this is a class on plant breeding. But yeah, so this guy here, I actually just recently repotted it. It was living in a 3-gallon container. When this plant came in, it was literally just one of those skinny little stalks. It was nothing. Luckily, I didn't pay too much for it. And so I actually bought this plant in August of 2020. Great timing, right? And so right before the prices shot up. And so yeah, so just on that note of how it was a tiny little bulblet in 2020, and already it's in a 7 or 10 gallon container in just functionally 2 years. But yeah, it's a pretty fast grower. You can kind of see with this plant that when they're in a big container like that, and they can fill it out, they're gonna spread and not be quite as dense. And maybe that's more this plant because it's the wild form. But what I like about this is I can tuck this into a corner of my tropical garden in the summertime. In this case, it would be deep shade, and it will give my garden a really nice vibe. In this case, this plant is in a north-facing window. It might get a tiny bit of direct sun during the while the sun is setting in the west. I guess here's the selling point for the Stromanthe wild form. Is this plant, if you have one of those dark corners that, like, you know, even a cast iron plant doesn't do that well in, this plant will do well. And that's a slight exaggeration. This is actually a fantastic companion to a cast iron plant, Aspidistra, because they can live in that dark environment and, you know, be okay. But that said, you know, giving it a little bit of morning sun is obviously a preferential thing. Any shade plant is going to enjoy having a little bit of morning sun. Alright guys, so in summary, basically what Stromanthe or Thalia or Magic Star, Trio Star, what they need is a big pot, lots of water and humidity around them. Don't fertilize them in the winter unless you're using fish tank water. And their whole light situation is really kind of dependent on the plant. Trio Star can take a decent amount of light. In this case, variegation will be maintained better with more light. It's not always the case with some plants. But they're very variable as far as light. If you want to see more content just like this, be sure to tap that subscribe button very gently. It's also been a little while since I've thanked all of my awesome subscribers, everyone who drops a comment and a like. Truly, it is awesome, and I appreciate every single one of you. Thanks for watching. You know, blah, 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 blah.